Hi, this is John with the Thanatopian Institute, and I'm making basically this is a PowerPoint presentation, but it's about one of the best books I ever read in my lifetime. I'm now 66, and I'd read this when I was approximately 23 years old while I was at a Lutheran seminary. But in Christianity, there's many proofs and many things that have, led me in the affirmation of my Christian faith, during both good and bad periods of my life, but let's talk about Dr. Ernest Becker, which is he was a secular Jewish professor, and he did win a Pulitzer Prize for this book. Basically, it's kind of a secular affirmation of one of the key messages in the scriptures that I think is maybe not explored enough or not delved into enough typically in your pulpit and through your general Christian teachings, but he provides a synthesis between, I think, Christianity, the Christian faith, and secular psychology, cultural anthropology. But in my little scheme of my developing my worldview and then my Christian view, there's many elements that go into it. And this is just, if we look at thanatopsis, the fear of death, which is very significant, which is what Dr. Becker had written about. And I won't go all these other areas, but when you add all these up, you come up with a fairly cohesive worldview that has integrity and viability. Becker was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, to a Jewish immigrant family. He was in military service and served in World War II, helped liberate Nazi concentration camps. He attended Syracuse University in New York. Upon graduation, he joined the U.S. Embassy in Paris as an administrative officer. In his early 30s, he returned to Syracuse University to pursue graduate studies in cultural anthropology. He completed his PhD in 1960. The first of his 9 books, Zen, A Rational Critique, was based on his doctoral dissertation. And he went on to become a professor at a number of colleges. Not always, I'll go on here. He began teaching at Syracuse for a few years and then got fired for siding with his mentor, Thomas Schaas, which in the psychotherapy area. And Thomas Schaas is pretty well known. Then he went on to the University of California, Berkeley, and there again he had trouble because he sided with thousands of students who were protesting the administration's stringent policies against student demonstrations. In 1969, he began a professorship at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada, where he would spend the remaining years of his academic life. And it was during this period that he wrote the 1974 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death. Becker this is from Wikipedia, so you have to take everything with a grain of salt or several grains of salt from Wikipedia, but, for a general outline, we'll use it. Becker was an academic outcast in the last decade of his life. Well, maybe he didn't fit into this mainstream, but outcast, I don't particularly like that. I see 2 months, it was only with the award of the Pulitzer Prize in 1974, 2 months after his death from cancer at the age of 49. is when he died. And he had written other books that, I would also recommend, but for me, the book Denial of Death was an epiphany of sorts for someone to actually write down what I had, affirmations of what I intuitively thought, and find another person out there that, cohesively and very succinctly put together those theories. Let me read parts of a book review by Herbert Calhoun, who's a prominent Amazon book reviewer. He called this book, this tour de force is Becker's Immortality Project, is fitting gift to all mankind. In it, he tackles the preeminent problem of mankind, what he refers to as the vital lie, man's refusal to accept his own lack of immortality. The author brilliantly, passionately, and honestly and convincingly analyzes man's failure to confront his own finitude. Man's denial of the inevitability of death is an attempt to escape the terror of the ultimate fear, to escape the ultimate human psychological debilitation, to evade the ultimate human dilemma. It is the fear of death that deprives him or drives him into an existential and ontological black hole, all escapes of which are either temporary or existentially incomplete or dishonest. Since he cannot, meaning man, cannot transcend his mortality, man can only maintain denial at a tremendous cost to himself, his mind. He is forced to live a life of either meaningless or a lie, psychological delusion. In either case, his only choice is the brand of neurosis he will choose. Man, ever the narcissistic being, can assign value and meaning to his life only by making himself into a hero in his own symbolically created world, the most important of which is society itself. In this self-defined, self-centered, self-contained drama, society's cultural system, I think it would call the superego by, Freud, but man proceeds to create a script for his own heroism in his own life project. And from the start, this project is doomed to ignominious failure, existential failure, for man has no respectable escapes other than that of facing the truth of his own condition, and then having to endure the abject terror that implies, or remaining in denial by choosing an appropriate role as a hero in his own symbolically created life drama. Whether the drama is religious or not is somewhat beside the point, since the escape is through the same delusional door. In either case, achieving the heroism in his own self-defined, fantasized world leaves man with a false feeling that he has somehow transcended mortality. It is a monumental lie. Now, some of the statements there I would have to amend or change by saying, unless there is an objective reality, a faith structure which truthfully presents who we are, and we can constantly build up false lies of to give us meaning, but if there is a meaningful objective statement of objective reality, then we can move towards understanding that truth. And this is where, to me, Christianity comes in. Thanatopsis, and came across this thing from Harper's Magazine, I think it was was 1816. Well, that's where this is from Bryant. Interesting photo, a soldier in the plains area, probably looking at a skull, contemplating his own death. But I use the term thanatopsis as generalized to mean the fear of death, as well as the conscious and subconscious contemplations of one's mortality. And I don't care who you are. People say they don't fear death and this and that. Well, they haven't dug deep enough into their own subconscious to understand the enormous effect that has on them. And often many people who may have not, walked some of the difficult ways in life and lost people they love and dealt with grief and facing death may be able to say that. But in general, I think, and most people won't admit that they fear death, but it is ontologically, subconsciously, in depth by DEPTH, depth psychology, and study of the subconscious, a significant prime mover of the human being and the choices that are made. And I also want to point out that Dr. Becker was not alone in his premise or his understanding of this. And throughout history, we have people such as Kierkegaard and in the 1800s and Paul Tillich, 1900s, the Lutheran theologian, Sigmund Freud, and particularly Otto Rank, Martin Heidegger, St. Paul of Tarsus in the New Testament, Bishop Fulton J. Sheen, St. John Climacus, the Ladder of Divine Ascent, all of who, and many more, who I consider some of the greatest philosophers or thinkers, psychologists. They all recognize this as a prime mover in the human makeup, but Becker synthesized many of these theories into a contemporary statement of this same issue. In Christianity, is a particularly key theme that you're going to find in Christian, in the body of Christian work in the New and Old Testament. Let's take Psalm 23 for example. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And that would be one expression we find of the conscious and subconscious nature of our dilemma in the world. Hebrews in the New Testament, which Hebrews I think is one of the most profound books that we can find in the scriptures, and very well is about a 12-page statement of the Christian faith written at a fairly high level. It says, "For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he," meaning Christ, "also likewise himself took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver them who through the fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage." So to go back into the into a little deeper into what Becker tells us, and first on a personal, and how it affects our thinking and our actions and motives in life. On a personal level, by ignoring our own mortality and vulnerability, we build up an unreal sense of self. We act out of a false sense of who and what we are. Second, as members of society, we tend to identify with one or another immortality system. as Becker called it. That is, we identify with a religious group or political group or engage in some kind of cultural activity to adopt a certain culturally sanctioned viewpoint that we invest with ultimate meaning, to which we ascribe absolute and permanent truth. And how true that is. So this inflates us with a sense of invulnerable righteousness, and then we have to protect ourselves against the exposure against the exposure of our absolute truth being just one more immortality denying system among others, which we can only do by insisting all other truths are false. So we attach and degrade, preferably kill, the adherents of a different mortality denying absolute truth system. So the Protestant kills the Catholic, the Muslims vilify the Christians, and vice versa. The upholders of the American way of life denounce communists. The Khmer Rouge slaughter all intellectuals in Cambodia. The Spanish Inquisition tortures heretics, and all good students of the Enlightenment demonize religion as the source of all evil. And how true is that? You can see that operating constantly in the world. Just open up the newspaper, watch the news. People polarizing to different groups and feeling they have the ultimate solution to the ultimate immortality vehicle to overcome their fear of death on a group level, and they join that group, and we have wars, we have bloodshed, we have the intellectual basis to demonize others and kill and dehumanize. And this fear of death, when you analyze it, is the source of much evil in the world. That's actually the source by which Satan, if you happen to believe in him, uses as a prime tool. So it's hard to say that this psychological this description of the ingredient of a human being could be said to be empirical, because psychology does not necessarily dish out empirical evidence. But there is a division of epistemology, being the science of knowledge, called empirical metaphysics, which, to me, I consider Becker's theories and the others that have put this forth as about as empirical as any type of metaphysical system can be. Now, rarely is Dr. Becker's work used within a Christian context, and he never espoused any Christian views or any adoption of any particular, quote, immortality system, because that would be contrary to what he was espousing in his book, that, they're all, say, quasi false, and that they're just basically vehicles to propel oneself beyond the fear of death. But I think Christian scripture and Christian theology and the whole Old and New Testament point us to the reality and of a system that does provide us ultimate meaning. So, strict purist people that would say that I've kind of copped out and adopted an immortality vehicle, but so be it. That's the way it is. But Becker's work, Becker is not taught a lot, as far as I can tell anymore, in college or graduate schools. And indeed, when I took the course at seminary from a very smart, I consider very bright professor, he said that a lot of people in the class would find this book offensive, and they would not bond with it. And indeed, he was right. I would say most of the class indeed did not really maybe understand it or believe it, or I did, because my life experiences, I was fairly young, but I'd lost a lot of people in my life and had a lot of hardship, and I'd had to face not my personal demise, but the demise of other people that I loved and cared for in my life. So I think I was a little more open to understanding it, and but and then secular university education is seldom going to point you towards Christianity as being a meaningful response to our existential situation in life. But at the core of the Christian message, I find Becker's work to be an affirmation of the Christian message. So for the purists out there, but this just fits into one of my, to how I understand, different elements, and I can spend hours in discussing all these different factors, but I consider thanatopsis, the fear of death, to be one of the key building blocks of my faith and understanding the Christian message. And, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And what did Christ do? He overcame death, the final enemy. Freed from the fear of death, Hebrews 2:15, as I mentioned earlier. So, to me, Dr. Becker's book, his theory in denial of death, will provide another affirmation of the gospel message. As the Christian message, Christ came to defeat the great enemy of mankind, death. As one moves along in their faith life, thanatopsis will become less and less of a factor in one's life, because to understand the Christian message is to understand that death has been defeated by Christ. The Christian has a solid objective basis upon which to build a truthful, meaningful worldview. While we do not get complete answers to the great mystery called life, we'll find the Christian message to give us the most solid basis upon which we can build. The scriptures do not give us every answer. I mean, there's a lot of questions we would have, but as I've plodded along in life, I continually come back to the scriptures, and I find answers there, and I find it not to be truthful. Dr. Becker, let me reiterate, never affirmatively espoused any religious leanings. His research and theories are secular. I'm sure that if for secular, more liberal, those more secular and liberal persuasions, they will take offense in my using his works to be an affirmation of the Christian message, but that happens to be my opinion, and the opinion of many philosophers, theologians, and religious figures throughout written history. Thanatopsis is central to human ontology. And for Christians, I would recommend that you read this book if you want to delve deeper into understanding the Christian faith. I found many secular authors, for instance, Franz Kafka, and others, to provide empirical metaphysical building blocks upon which integrate well into the scriptures. So that's it for right now. God bless. Take care. And I hope you found this video of some interest. Goodbye.